Hi everyone, I've been trying to make this video for the past couple of days, and every time I do, something goes wrong. Either I need to let licorice outside and then I forget and then I come all the way back and then I have not finished the video, or someone comes or someone calls me. Something has gone wrong every single time. So I'm going to start and hopefully nothing goes wrong. So we're in James chapter 1. So it says, the first verse says, James, a servant of God and of the Lord Jesus Christ, to the 12 tribes which are scattered abroad, greeting. And I tied the which are scattered abroad greeting part to Matthew 28:18 through 20. And I highlighted the second verse, which says, my brethren, count it all joy when you fall into diverse temptations. And then verses 3 and 4 say, knowing this, the trying of your faith worketh patience, but let patience let patience have her perfect work, that ye may be perfect and entire, wanting nothing. And so what I wrote down was patience is a virtue, and we need to work to develop it. And then in verse 5, it says, if any of you lack wisdom, let him ask of God, that giveth to all men liberally, and upbraideth not, and it shall be given him. And so what I wrote down was, ask God to reveal himself to you. And so we all know that in Proverbs especially, it says that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. And so this respect and reverence of God is the beginning of knowledge and wisdom. But then Proverbs 9:10 also says, the knowledge of the Holy One is understanding. So you kind of get this idea of like respecting God and having reverence for him, plus knowing about him, is the start of knowledge and wisdom and understanding, and all these words that basically mean a little bit of the same thing. There's a little difference. So basically, when you ask for knowledge of God, you're basically asking for wisdom. So the best way you can become wise is to know more about God. And so ask God to reveal himself to you, and that will, and he will definitely give you wisdom if you ask. And so skipping down to verse 8, it says, a double-minded man is unstable in all his ways. And the phrase particularly, a double-minded man, just kind of stuck out. And I was like, okay, I'm going to research this. And so what I did was I looked up the Greek of the word, and basically it is, and I won't be able to pronounce this correctly because I don't speak Greek, but it is dipsuchos, dipsuchos, and it means wavering, uncertain, doubting, or it can mean divided in interest, and those basically kind of go together. And so someone who is wavering, uncertain, doubting, and divided in interest is unstable in all his ways. And so this phrase, a double-minded man, is also mentioned in James 4:8. So basically, I kind of thought of my definition of what I think it would be like someone trying to serve two masters. And we know that this is not something that can happen, and it's not easy to do because Matthew 6:24 talks about this. And you can't serve two masters. And so basically what I would attribute this double-minded man to is basically someone who is struggling between living for the world and living for God. And so someone who is not, like I said earlier, wavering and uncertain and doubting and divided in interest, and they're doubting their belief in God, or they're doubting their calling in God. And so they have this divided interest between God and the world, and that's kind of what I figured would be a very updated way of putting it, because not a lot of people understand what double-minded means. And so going to verse 10, it says, but the rich in that he is made low, because as the flower of the grass he shall pass away. For the sun is no sooner risen with a burning heat, but it withereth the grass, and the flower thereof falleth, and by the grace of the fashion of it perisheth. So also shall the rich man fade away in his ways. And the parts where it talks about the flower fading and the grass withering, I connected to Isaiah 40:8 because it talks about that. It talks about the grass withering and the flower fading, or flower passing. And then going down to verse 12, it said, blessed is the man that endureth temptation, for when he is tried, he shall receive the crown of life, which the Lord hath promised to them that love him. Let no man say when he is tempted, I am tempted of God. For God cannot be tempted with evil, neither tempteth he any man. I'm sorry, I don't really read out loud a lot, and I always mix up my words. So what I wrote down was, if you are enduring temptation or you're trying to endure temptation, you can look at these verses specifically. So there's Psalm 145:18. There's Matthew 4:34. There's Matthew 5:33 through 45. Sorry, that was not right at all. I'm mixing up my numbers now. It was Matthew 5:43 through 45, not 34. Romans 5 verse 2. 1 Corinthians 10 verse 13, and 2 Timothy 4 7 through 8, and then James 1 and 12 through 13. Obviously, this is the one we're talking about. And then verse 14, it says, "But every man is tempted when he is drawn away of his own lust and enticed." And so what I wrote down was, we are lured away by our own desires. And so basically, the other part I wrote down was that our old self, and that old self is quoted from Ephesians 4:22. Our old self is sinful and wants to sin. And so community helps this. So having someone who you can be accountable to, having an accountability partner, someone you can talk to without worry that they're going to go and tell someone else what you're struggling with, a sin that you're specifically struggling with, and having someone that you can just say, "Hey, I'm going through this, can you pray for me?" So having an accountability partner that can give you advice, that can give you prayer, that can give you support is very helpful when you're dealing with a sin, because while it's very easy to want to keep it secret, when you have someone who can help you, who can support you in your attempt to endure the temptation and not fall into it, it can help really well, because I know a lot of people who have talked about it, and they said the biggest support and the biggest thing that helped them get through their battle with a certain sin was that they had people behind them who was rallying behind them, and they had this basically accountability partner. And so that's just something to think just to keep in mind, basically. And then verse 15 says, "Then when lust hath conceived, it bringeth forth sin, and sin, when it is finished, bringeth forth death." And this verse made me think of Romans 6:23. I'm going to very quickly march over to that one. Romans 6:23. I should have bookmarked it. Okay, so Romans 6:23 says, "For the wages of sin is death, but the gift of God is eternal life through Jesus Christ our Lord." And so that also talks about the wages of sin being death, and sin bringing forth death. And so jumping down to verse 18, it says, "Of his own fruit will begat he us with the word of truth, that we should be a kind of first fruit of creatures." And I just highlighted that last part. And in verse 19, it says, "Wherefore, my brethren, let every man be swift to hear, and slow to speak, and slow to wrath." And so I wrote down that we should practice this. And I recently went to a convention. It's called the Arkansas Ladies Convention. And there were 3 services. I was able to attend a watch party for 2 of them, and then the third service I had to watch on my own at my house. And the biggest theme that I caught from all of it was, themes, because I'm talking about multiple, but one was humility, and embracing humility, not even just in a spiritual aspect, but like in the physical world, where we're in charge of someone, not to be too prideful, or wherever we're being exalted where someone else isn't, not to be prideful, or anything really. And so the huge thing was to be humble and to embrace humility and not think of it as something that is weakness or anything like that. And then the other biggest thing was listening and not speaking before you actually hear what someone's trying to say. And there was a lady who was one of the speakers, and her name is Melinda Poitras. And she started talking about how she's a fifth grade teacher. And so she understands, kind of how it is with kids. And she can have herself out in front of all of her kids, and she's explaining how the homework should be put away. So she has the maroon homework folders, and she's going through the kids. She's like, "Hey, you put your homework in this folder. This is how you do it. This is the way it should be organized." And she's giving great detail. And the whole time there's a kid, and he's raising his hand, and he really wants to speak. And she's like, "Not right now, I'll let you finish or I'll let you ask your question when I finish." And so the kid, is still putting his hand up. He's not relenting at all. And so she finally finishes explaining, and then she's like, "Okay, Josh, what's your question?" And then Josh, who clearly had not been paying attention at all, says, "So what do I do with my homework when I'm done with it?" And so the whole time she was telling him to put the homework in the maroon or the burgundy, I think is what she technically said, the burgundy homework folder. But the whole time he wasn't listening. And so she was giving him the instructions that he needed. However, he just was not listening, and he wanted to talk. He was not being slow to speak and slow to wrath and swift to hear. He was being very quick to speak and very slow to hear. And so that was a theme that just was like drilled into my head this weekend, or not this weekend, but this past weekend, is to really assess the situation and not just go off and speak about something that you don't have the full knowledge of or the full information of, or to respond to someone before you really get to hear them out. Because sometimes when we think we're completely in the right, sometimes we can realize by listening to what the other person has to say that, we're not completely as innocent as we thought we were. And then verse 20 says, "For the wrath of man worketh not the righteousness of God." And that was just one of the big verses that I was like, okay, yes, this is very good. So I wrote it at the top, and I wrote, "Wrath cannot lead to righteousness." So our humanity, our wrath cannot lead to righteousness. And then in verse 21 through 22, it says, "Wherefore lay apart all filthiness and superfluity of naughtiness, and receive with meekness the engrafted word, which is able to save your souls," which is that phrase right there, which is able to save your souls, the word, my favorite. But 22 says, "But be ye doers of the word, not hearers only, deceiving your own selves." And then I wrote down at the bottom of the page, "To lay aside all of our wicked ways and to walk in his word." So we should be doers and not hearers only, and to fully embrace what it is to walk in his word and to walk in his will. And I think that's very important, especially if you're a younger person, because you're trying to figure it out and you're like, well, I don't know. And if you just embrace walking in his word and what his word says, then it kind of leads you there. But verse 25 says, "Whoso looketh into the perfect law of liberty, and continueth therein, he being not a forgetful hearer, but a doer of the work, this man shall be blessed in his deed." And that goes back to the verse that I literally just read about being a doer and not just hearing things and actually going through with what you're saying and everything. And the last two verses of chapter 1, I might give a few of the things out of chapter 2, which I technically didn't record me journaling, but I might just throw them in as freebies. But verse 26 says, "If any man among you seems to be religious, and bridleth not his tongue, but deceiveth his own heart, this man's religion is vain. Pure religion and undefiled before God and the Father is this, to visit the fatherless and the and the widows in their," I don't know why I threw in poors, "to visit the fatherless and the widows in their affliction, and keep himself unspotted from the world." And I think that's probably just like the most dynamic verse. I know I said that about another verse earlier, but that is the most dynamic set of two verses in the first chapter. But throughout chapter 2, it really talks about not showing favoritism or partiality, as it says. And so we should treat everyone the same and not to judge others and become judges of evil thoughts, which is said in verse 4 of chapter 2. So it says, "And are ye not partial in yourselves, and are become judges of evil thoughts?" And so it basically just talks a lot about not showing partiality. And I probably should have journaled it so I can just put this at the end of it, but whatever. Or recorded myself journaling this. And then verses 14 through 26 are a lot about faith being shown by deeds. So works are a fruit of faith, and faith is shown by works. And because it says, "What doth it profit, my brethren, though a man say he hath faith and not hath works? Can faith save him?" And it says, if a brother or sister be naked and destitute of daily food, and one of you say unto him, Depart in peace, be warmed and filled, notwithstanding he give them not these things which are needful to the body, what doth it profit? Even so faith, if it hath not works, is dead, being alone. Yea, a man may say, Thou hast faith, and I have works. Show me thy faith without thy works, and I will show thee my faith by my works. Thou believest there is one God, thou doest well. The devils also believe and tremble. But wilt thou know, O vain man, that faith without works is dead? Was not Abraham our father justified by works when he offered Isaac his son up upon the altar? Okay, seest thou how faith wrought with his works, and by works was faith made perfect. I said I'm really bad at reading out loud, and here we go. And the scripture was fulfilled, which saith, Abraham believed God, and it was imputed unto him for righteousness, and he was called the friend of God. Ye see how that by works a man is justified by and not by faith only. And it goes on. There's like 2 more verses left. I guess I should probably just read them and finish it out. But it says, likewise was not Rahab the harlot justified by works when she received the messengers and had sent them out another way. For as the body without spirit is dead, so faith without works is dead also. And then this is the thing. I often read and journal without recording it, obviously, because I don't record everything that I do. However, I feel like James probably would have been a very good book to do an entire series on, doing chapter 2 and not just doing it in chapter 1. So I guess this is now a James 1 and James 2 study. But chapter 3, I basically was inspired to do a really more in-depth study on the tongue and the power of the tongue. So I went through verses like Proverbs 18:21, Proverbs 21:23, Proverbs 12:18. If you can't tell, Proverbs talks a lot about your speech and how you should conduct yourself, obviously, because it's Proverbs and it's well known for that. But I went through James 3 and 5 and then more Proverbs. And so basically I just laid out this whole list of not just negative things, though. I listed some positive things that can be brought by the tongue and then some negative things that can be brought by the tongue. So basically I have an entire study over the tongue. So basically I have an entire study on our mouths and how we should speak and how our speech should go. And so I guess I can make a video over that. And then chapter 4, I didn't technically journal yet, so I can do that. Okay. I'm basically going to try to make a series over this book now. Okay, but anyway, that is all of this, I think. I think I covered everything. It's a lot of notes. However, when you say it out loud, I don't have at least a lot of room in this Bible, so it looks like there's just like notes upon notes upon notes. But then when you start speaking it out loud, it doesn't seem like as much as it really was. But I may add in my testimony for our church. We had to do one, like I said, I guess it makes sense. I mentioned how I went to the ladies' conference earlier, and I basically had to testify how my experience was and whatever, and what I got out of it. It's really hard to explain. You basically just testify how it helped you in a way, basically. Okay, anyway, so this is where I'm getting a little awkward, but I'm probably going to add it in at the end just because I did mention ladies conference, and so now you can see a little bit about what I learned. And I think it's always good to share parts of your testimony, and even in random places like this Bible study with me video. But I hope that you have learned something, and I will try to have the Bible collection part 2 video up soon. I don't know why it's called Bible collection videos, but that's what YouTube calls it, or people on YouTube call it. But I'm basically just going to review a couple more of my Bibles. I've already reviewed 4, and I'm probably going to do 3 or 4 in this next video, and my voice is going out if you can't tell. I've had trouble all day. I had to sing, and we practiced so much this morning that I think it killed my voice. But yeah, so I'm going to try to have another video up. I honestly meant to have this one up weeks ago, but like I said, every time I tried to sit and do a voiceover because I didn't record my voice talking in this video when I was recording the video, so I had to do a voiceover, and every time I tried, something would go wrong, and so now I finally had the time to do it. But like I said, I hope you learned something, and I'll have another video soon-ish, probably next week. And yeah, have a good day. I forgot to say, but this is now the part where we go to the testimony. So if you don't want to watch it, you can just exit out now. I also suggest that if you haven't done it by now, you should probably turn it on like 1.5 times speed or 2 times speed, just because I talk really slow. So if you're going to get through this video, you should probably at least turn it on 2 times speed. Okay.
Now, I was told I had 3 to 5 minutes, and I'm going to take every bit of that 5 minutes because I am surprisingly long-winded. But, so the idea is very, very simple. However, it takes a little bit of explanation, and Sister Renee already touched on it a little bit. But I'm just going to go through the story of Esther very, very briefly. So it starts with a lady named Vashti, and if I'm wrong, Rockland can correct me later. But her name is Vashti. I think that's how you pronounce it. But she was a queen, and then she made, long story short, she angered the king, and then she was no longer queen. And so the king was single and ready to mingle, and he wanted to find a new queen. However, throughout the story, we basically get to Esther being queen. So Esther's now the queen, and as Sister Renee said, there was a rule for men and women that you couldn't go into his presence without his permission. He had to ask for you first, and if you did, then he had to put out a scepter, and that would be the exception of like, okay, you're fine. So there's a guy named Haman, not Naaman, although I always want to say Naaman, and he has a plan that basically puts Esther and all of her people at stake. Like, their lives are at risk, and she's trying to somehow go up to the king without losing her life, but save her people at the same time. So like Sister Renee said, she's in a really hard place. And so when she goes up to the king, before she goes up to the king, she's talking with Mordecai, who is her cousin, and he says, "For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place, but you and your father's family will perish, and who knows that you have come to your royal position at such a time as this." So she has a lot of pressure on her, and she goes up, and the king obviously is he loves her. He says basically, "What do you want? I'll give you up to the half of my entire kingdom." And so Melinda makes the point that her life was never really at risk because he loved her, and she was like the perfect wife to him. She never caused him problems. She was definitely not a Vashti to him. And so she had this problem where she was living as a queen, but she had the mindset of a slave still. And when I heard that, I was just like, oh, okay. And I was picking up the fragments of my toes that were left, and I was just like, oh, no, this is directly at me. Because for a very long time, and I can't be too apparent about my story, and if you haven't caught on by now or you don't know, it may be a little confusing, but for a very long time, I was internalizing everything that I was hearing and everything that was happening to me, and I started developing the slave mindset, and I realized this year, I was like, okay, yeah, this is definitely at me. And so while it was very eye-opening and it was very convicting, it was also eye-opening in the way of, like, I have come a lot farther than I give myself credit for, because, like, 3 years ago, if I were up here, I'd be crying right now. But Harrison and I actually had a conversation about this the other day, because there's a picture where he's going like this, and I'm going like this, and I'm literally crying. I had a mental breakdown over nothing. Like, he wanted to take a picture. He had the audacity to ask me to take a picture and pose like this in public, and I thought that was the end of the world. And I was crying. And he was like, "Kim, you've come pretty far. Like, do you not remember crying in this picture?" I was like, "No, I don't remember that at all." And so there's also another story where I'm in the lab, and I'm working with CDubia, and I'm doing my thing. And so connected to the lab is a science room. And all of the kids in there are watching a movie. They're completely distracted, and they're facing away from me. And the scissors that I need, because I need to cut something out, is like right here, and they're all over here. And so it's very, very simple. All I do is walk from the lab, go into the hallway, the door, grab the scissors, walk back, and go all the way back to my place. However, in my brain, that was also the end of the world, because I didn't want to go in there with people, because people terrified me. And so we were also talking about that story, and like I was so afraid to go get the scissors in a room of distracted people who had never even noticed that I was there. And I was like, oh goodness. So while it was very convicting, it also made me realize that like God has taken me so much further than I thought I'd had even gone. Like, I have been so much better than I have been in a while, like, because I was very depressed and lost and broken and full of anxiety, and I'm a lot better about it now. And it was definitely God, because there's no way I could have done it. Like, it was too much work. I would not have been able to do what happened there. And so while I was at ladies' conference, I was just completely reminded again and again of how constant and faithful and always present he is, and how he can take you from being this broken teenager who thinks that she might not even live to see the next 3 years to being where I am now. Because I'm teaching the kids back there, and they're so great, and they always remind me, like, he's there. And so he can do anything. And that was just another reminder that, like, he's there and he's constant.